Hey guys, Nofal Jari here from Life with a Sixth Sense. Here we try to learn more about ourselves to make life seem just a little simpler. Enjoy the podcast. Hey guys, Nofal Jari here from Life with a Sixth Sense, and today I'm joined with the wonderful Dr. Jim Davies, who's the professor at Carleton University in the Department of Science for Cognitive Science. He's a playwright, artist, and author, and we're going to be talking about his books and his research today. He received a bachelor in philosophy from the State University of New York, his master's in psychology, and his PhD in computer science from Georgia Institute of Technology. So thank you so much for being here, Doctor.
That's my pleasure.
Yeah, and you've been doing a lot of work on a bunch of different things, and I've been receiving comments and stuff from people about your research and your books and asking questions and stuff like that. Well, I know you have multiple books now, right?
No, I've only published one. I've written
Published
several.
one. Okay. And your most recent one was out 2014, Riveted,
That's
correct?
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit about what that's about?
Yeah, I got interested. I've always been an amateur artist my whole life, doing dance and theater and writing, and all kinds of stuff. And as I got trained as a scientist, I started to question some of the rules that they teach you in like art school and stuff. In theater directing, they'll teach you things like motion from left to right on the stage from the audience's point of view is considered good motion, and the other direction is bad. So when you block a scene, you want to have your protagonist coming from the left and moving right. And it just struck me that, you could probably test a lot of this stuff scientifically, but of course the people who came up with these things, the artists, aren't scientists, right? They're not trained in that.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But I had my, I had my PhD to get, which is very busy. So it wasn't until I graduated that I could actually start looking into it. And when I did, I found that I started looking into it at the right time, because in the last, 20 years or so, there's been a real flourishing of scientific research about why we find stuff compelling and interesting, right?
Right.
But I also that there's a huge literature on the cognitive science of religion, and even though these two fields aren't talking to each other, a lot of the same things that attract us to art attract us to religion as well. And it sort of dawned on me, maybe we're interested in we're compelled by things for a very small set of psychological reasons. So I wrote this book, Riveted, and it's got the bulky title, Riveted, the science of why jokes make us laugh, movies make us cry, and religion makes us feel one with the universe.
Right.
Call it Riveted. And I came up with this theory that everything we like is for these same small few reasons, from sports to fail videos to gossip and everything. So that's how it got started.
Okay, really interesting. And you mentioned something really interesting to me, something that attracts our attention. Now, we spoke earlier, and you talked about how you have a theory on why we all, like a basic theory to explain why we all have certain aspects that make us attract to things. Can you talk about that theory?
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of foundations. I call it the compellingness foundations theory, because there's a bunch of things that, think of it like a bunch of buttons in your head, and if something presses those buttons, you're going to be interested. The first, and none of these are like none of these are shocking, okay?
Right.
But what is shocking is how many things they all apply to. So the first one is that we're interested in people and our status in a social hierarchy.
Okay.
And this is manifested in everything. So it's obvious in stories. Like, stories don't even you can't even call something a story unless it has characters, right?
Yeah.
So particularly drama between characters is incredibly compelling, and we really find ourselves wanting to see the outcome, even if it's a completely fictional bunch of characters. And the reason for that is because most of our evolution as human beings was spent on the plains of Africa in small groups of about 150 people. And this is something that's very hard to grasp as a modern contemporary person.
Yeah.
But those people did not have much experience with representations. And what I mean by that is most of the things you saw were what they looked like. Right?
Right, yeah.
You might see a billboard or a picture in a magazine or hear somebody's voice on the phone, and it's very easy to forget that is not a person you're looking at. That is ink.
That is a picture.
And we see thousands and thousands and thousands of representations every day, and our ancestors did not. And what this means is that most of our brain has not really caught up with media, in the sense that most of our brain really believes what we're looking at is
It's
real.
real. Yeah. Okay.
So when we see, let's say, my favorite show, The Sopranos, you watch Tony Soprano, struggling to maintain control of his mafia empire. The reason that is so riveting is because part of our mind thinks that he's our leader. And anytime we see a leader in trouble, we best pay attention. Because you can imagine the people, our ancestors, if they didn't pay attention to who's in charge, they could be very easily taken advantage of, right?
Oh,
so
for sure, yeah.
Evolutionary pressure to pay attention. Anyway, I had to write a whole book about it, so it's very hard to summarize. But like, even if you go to something that is like you think has nothing to do with people, like music,
right?
Even music, which is probably the most abstract of the arts, actually, people prefer songs. Okay.
Yeah.
Instrumental music is somewhat popular, but the vast majority of music in the world that people like is lyrical, and those songs are mostly about love and lost love and what we might call reproductive imagery. And
oh yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah,
conflict and it's a lot of the same stuff as stories get us, right in the heart. Like singing a song about doing your tax return and how you get it done. And there's no conflict. Is not, it better have a damn good beat because
exactly.
Aren't going to attract you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, sports are about conflict, right? So they're like a symbolic conflict, and we can also see lots of symbolic conflict in the animal world. So apes will tear up vegetation instead of fighting, and crabs will wave their claws around. Oh, actually, I should mention I have a podcast called Minding the Brain.
Right. Yeah. I've seen it online.
Might be interested in, and we just recorded, so it's not out when we're recording this episode, but. Eventually, there will be a whole episode on the psychology of sports and why we like to watch sports. So, and of course, religion has gods that are human-like in many ways. So it just goes on and on. That's just one of the foundations.
Right. Okay. It's funny you mentioned because I'm actually a classical musician myself. I'm a violist. So, when you mentioned instrumental music, I'm sorry.
No jokes, please.
No jokes, of course not. No. But no, so it's like you mentioned that instrumental music is in quote unquote less popular than lyrical music.
Right.
Why is it that instrumental music doesn't attract our attention as much than lyrical music besides the actual lyrics themselves?
So you can go deep into the psychology of music in terms of just notes and beats and octaves and harmonies. Yeah. And there are regular things that are more pleasing than others. Mm-hmm. People don't like screeching sounds that often. Regular beats are, people like them. People like them being close to their heartbeat. So there's all kinds of theory. We don't really know exactly for sure why, the music itself, independent of the lyrics, is compelling. But in a really popular piece of music that has, you got all that plus, right?
Yeah.
So it's more like, a great movie doesn't have to be in color.
Yep.
But if it's really great colors, it doesn't have to have amazing characters, but if it does, it's a better movie, right? So I sort of see it like that. Like, I think a lot of instrumental music kind of takes a little, like you have to learn to appreciate it a little bit,
Right,
like
yeah.
Kids sing nursery rhymes and there's no instruments at all, right? It's just like, nothing but little sing-songs, right? And then eventually you grow into, hey, I kind of like electronic dance music or, a chamber choir or something like that.
Okay. Well, you also talked about how our brain is basically in the past, right? And we're evolving so much, and our brain is kind of in the past. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your opinion on how we were attracted to things in the past compared to now, and why that is?
So I want to be clear. I don't think our brains are so much different, right? So the thing is that this is a little bit of an exaggeration because evolution is always happening, but for many purposes, we are basically walking around a modern contemporary society with a brain that was built for a hunter-gatherer society in Africa.
Okay. Yeah.
And so our key to our species' success is that we're able to learn, and I can talk about why we're such good learners. That's a fascinating story too, if you ask me. But the reason that we can thrive in all these environments, that's something other animals really can't do.
Right.
is because we're born knowing very little and being able to do very little, and we have a great capacity for learning. So babies are just born in the Arctic, and they're like, okay, how do I eat? How do I, you have to learn it. And you drop the same baby in the rainforest with a community, it'll learn those things.
Right. Learning through experience and being forced to actually have to do it and doing whatever you have to do to survive and stuff like that.
And of course, those different cultures have different things that they like. But what I'm interested in are the commonalities, right? Even if you look at like food, and I know people like to focus on the differences, right? They'll be like, oh, I don't like this food, or that country likes disgusting food, or whatever.
Right.
There are broad trends. Like in general, if you look across the cuisines of the world, across time, space, everything, people like fat, sugar, salt.
Right, yeah.
Like calories, high calorie density. I was just reading about how a modern hunter-gatherer society, they tracked this guy going hunting, and he happened across a beehive, and he drank a pint of honey.
Oh my gosh.
One sitting. He drank like a pint of honey, which is something like we wouldn't be able to do, but they're really starved for calories, right? Like they're lean people, So that's what I mean is sort of like we've got, and now we've got foods engineered. This is one of the reasons I wrote the book. I want people to have like a psychological immune system, because people now make food like Cheetos or something that taste so good. I mean, it's like it's got fat, it's got salt, and it's got very high calorie content. And basically, Cheetos or Cheetos-like food for our ancestors, you would not pass that up if you found it, because just the guy drinking a pint of honey, like you don't know when you're going to get your next bit of fat and sugar, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
But now we live in like this world of abundance, and our ancestral brains that haven't changed that much are still kind of a slave, and we just can't stop eating.
That's interesting. You mentioned this like how we learn, right? And you were like, oh, if you don't ask me, then I won't talk about it. But I'll ask you. Like, why is it that?
Oh my God, this is such a cool story. It's a little complicated, but it's really interesting. So. Okay, so there are things in you know what an arms race is, right? An arms race is when there are two or more competing entities, and basically whoever has more wins, and so they just try to one-up each other all the time, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that can happen in evolution, and the idea is that human beings had an arms race with intelligence. Okay? And what's important to keep in mind, a lot of people when they think about evolution, they think about escaping from a tiger or something, right? But for most species, evolution is the creatures are competing with other members of their species.
Right.
That is the biggest competition, actually. If you watch like nature documentaries, it's always like the buffalo are fighting the other buffalo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That makes complete sense.
It's like we live in these dense communities, and if you can outsmart the other person, you've got this really great advantage. So evolution is in this arms race for intelligence. Well, the easiest way to make something more intelligent is to add brain size. Okay. Well, with everything, there's eventually a trade-off. Okay. And the trade-off with human beings is that as the brain gets bigger, it gets harder and harder for women to safely give birth.
Okay. Why is that?
Now, well, because the hips can't get to an arbitrary size.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, this is the other interesting part. We are bipedal, right? We are the only apes that are fully walking on our hind legs, and our legs we call them, but in other analogous species they would be hind legs, right?
Right.
And our front legs have basically evolved into hands that we can carry things and manipulate things, which also contributed to our intelligence. But bipedalism has a drawback, and that is that basically a woman's pelvis cannot get any wider, or else they wouldn't be able to effectively run.
Okay. Yeah.
Now we have, and if they can't run, they won't survive long enough to reproduce.
That's true. Yep.
What do we have here? We have competing evolutionary goals here, right? I mean, they're goals. Evolution doesn't really work by goals, but it's just a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
We have the women are trying to keep their pelvis small, and our brains are trying to get bigger and bigger. So, what does evolution do? You can see evidence of it all over the place. First of all, childbirth is extraordinarily dangerous. Like in the modern world, it's very safe, but a lot of women died before the medical revolution.
Of course.
Like it was very, very common for a woman to die. That's how important intelligence was. Evolutionary. For evolution, it was worth killing off, fertile women to get these big brain sizes, right?
Yeah.
So what did it do? The pelvis of the woman actually expands when they give birth, like childbirth is way more painful for humans than other apes. Okay, so the pelvis expands and the head gets totally warped, the baby's head. And you know how you're not supposed to press on that little spot in the middle of the baby? The baby's skull is pieces and it fuses together later, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we see all of these, reasons that, like, trade-offs that evolution, quote unquote, discovered to deal with this competition between women keeping their pelvis small and the head getting bigger. Now, here's where learning comes in. One way to get smarter and smarter without making the head bigger and bigger is for the infant to know less and less and to instead focus on learning. So if you look at most birds, for example, as soon as they're born, they pop out of the egg and they're hopping around and getting food. Right. Now compare that to a human baby, which is like useless,
useless and quote unquote,
you have to support the baby until they're like, 13, 18, or when they leave grad school at 35, or maybe that was just me. Like, they require enormous amounts of care because they're so useless.
Right.
So that was what evolution did. It was like, okay, we're going to make a general purpose learning mechanism. This wasn't a conscious decision, of course, but basically, the ones that were a general purpose learning system, more than knowing how to do everything hardwired, had the strategic advantage because they could learn to do anything with a smaller brain that would grow a little bit later. Okay.
Yeah.
So the combination of bipedality, being on two legs, that freed up our hands to do fine manipulation, carrying tools, better hunting, and the constraints it put on the pelvis of the woman forced this learning specialty, which is why we're such incredible learners.
Right, and we learn quicker then.
They were the best learners in the animal kingdom.
In the animal kingdom, yeah. And like that also leads to, in my opinion, like, well, of course, proof that like animals, when they're born, right, they don't actually, like, my question is that you talked about why we have to learn, right? But as far as animals, they don't have a necessity to learn, right? Which is why they can be born and then just go out and about. Do you think that there will ever be a time where animals will actually have to learn as quick as us?
So I do want to say, first of all, that animals vary a lot in the word they use in biology is precocious. So the creatures that know exactly what to do as soon as they're born are very precocious, and the ones that don't know anything are more altricious. So humans are the most altricious species, right?
Okay.
And perhaps fish of the animals. Like a lot of fish will just lay their eggs and leave them.
Right. Yeah.
So they don't even raise them. But you can see killer whales teaching their pups how to hunt. So there is learning in the natural world. It's just not quite as much. Now your question about will they ever have to learn? In a sense, it's already happening.
Right.
So a question might be, would they ever have to learn as much as human beings? And this was where I might lose some of your listeners, but personally, I think that that would take millennia. Like, that would take so long that I feel like we will have re-engineered our entire world before that happens.
Okay.
Technologically speaking, like genetic engineering is going to completely swamp evolutionary effects. To me, it's like asking about the future of evolution for humans, for example, is like looking at my house and saying, "Oh, I wonder how the rain is going to destroy the roof over the course of 100 years." I'm like, the house is going to be torn down and rebuilt 3 times in 100 years.
Right.
So the rain is completely negligible effect. That's what I feel is the future of genetic engineering. Okay, and so for other animals, we don't know what's going to happen with them.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But like, I wanted to go back to what attracts our attention. So So what research have you done with as far as attracting our own attention?
So I talked about social stuff.
Yeah.
Another big one is pattern. We really like to see patterns, and I mean that in the most broad sense. And music is a wonderful example of how pattern really gets us.
Yeah.
So if you look at like a pop song, for example,
right.
We have repeating patterns at many, I think I counted like 6 levels, right? We have, usually the same instruments being used throughout the song. We have a constant beat. We have riffs. We have patterns of chords. Everything's in the same key.
Repetition of choruses. Yeah.
Well, then you get to the words, right? So what do? You have like a verse. So you might sing a verse. And then you're interested because it's kind of novel. We'll talk about novelty in a minute,
sure.
But patterns that we're talking about right now. And then you sing another verse, and then just as you're sort of like, okay, that's enough, then they do a chorus. And the chorus is usually like a little bit catchier, and you get into that. Then you have another verse, and then you go back to a chorus. And then when you come back to the chorus, we're talking about the first time you hear a song, right?
Right.
You get an opioid reaction. What I mean by that is when you see patterns, you get a rush of pleasure. And it might be minor, but just recognizing, oh, there's a pattern there is pleasurable. It's like innately pleasurable. And this is partially because we're built to learn. If you don't get pleasure at noticing patterns, you're not going to be a good learner. You're not going to be curious enough to learn what you need to do to survive and compete with other humans. And then, you have another verse and a chorus. And then just as you're getting tired of that pattern of verse chorus, what do you got? A bridge.
Right.
Where you might change the key and like, oh, it perks up the listener's interest again. And then just as that might start to get a little bit weird and too far out there, you return to a few more choruses and the song is over. So you can think of a pop song, for example, as a great example of manipulating your anticipation, your pattern matching, and your drive for novelty to make a satisfying experience that lasts, 3 minutes or so.
Right. But like also as far as anticipation, is it because of evolution always wanting, like we always want to know what's going to come up next? So we always have this idea. It is, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are constantly trying to predict the future in various ways. And what's interesting is that when there is no pattern, we get superstitious.
Yeah, exactly.
This is like, so what I think one of the best examples is in sports. So in baseball, for example, you see a lot of rituals, superstitious rituals, right?
Right.
I don't know if you watch baseball.
A little bit.
So who are the ones doing the rituals? They're the batters and the pitchers. It turns out, in baseball, those are the most unpredictable, chance-related positions you can be in. Okay.
Right.
So you don't see left outfielders doing a whole bunch of rituals while the ball's in the air. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason is because once the ball's hit, you have a fairly good idea of what you need to do to catch it, if it's possible to catch it, and you're probably going to be right. That is not the situation with a pitcher, right? And we even find this with religion. So they did a study of these fishermen, and they could either fish in the open ocean or in this harbor. Okay, that was just where they lived.
Okay.
Fishing in the harbor was fairly reliable, low catch, meaning you'd get a few fish pretty reliably. If you fished on the open ocean, you might get a lot of fish and you might get nothing. Where do you think all their religious rituals went?
Well, the second one, yeah.
The open ocean. Yeah, the open ocean. And that just follows the pattern that in an unpredictable environment, people develop superstition and even religion, right? And this is true across animal species. Some of the first experiments in behavior psychology was with pigeons, and they would just randomly give them food. So like they'd make them hungry and then put them in a cage, and then pellets would come out completely randomly.
Right.
Each pigeon developed its own superstitious behavior. So if the pigeon happened to be spinning around for no good reason when the food pellet came out, it'll start spinning around all the time to try to make food come out.
Yeah. Okay.
Now the other pigeon is not, moving its head up and down. It will develop its superstition. All of them completely off kilter from reality.
And like you were also talking about novelty earlier.
Okay, right. So the flip side of patterns is what I call incongruity, which is basically we have a drive to seek out stuff that we don't understand. And this is curiosity. This is like the basis of curiosity. And at the brain level, it activates the dopamine system, which is about drive and craving.
Yes.
Okay. So I want your listeners to get this. Like you've got two very powerful systems in your brain. One is for pleasure and the other is for drive.
Yes.
Okay. So when you're an addict,
mm-hmm.
gambling, drugs, a lot of it is like you stop feeling pleasure at doing it, you just can't stop doing it, right? That's a dopamine reaction, all right? Like the first few times you have this, pleasure reaction, but then you just have drive. Anyway, so if I were to tell you a joke. Jokes are a great example. I tell you a good joke, and you laugh at it. What happens the next time if I tell you the same joke immediately?
I wouldn't laugh at it. It wouldn't be as funny.
Yeah, you're like, come on now. So your mind has like understood it and put it away, and it's ready for something new. So good artworks manipulate pattern and incongruity so that your interest is always maintained, even though you're constantly discovering new patterns. This is why a lot of music, and this is true for classical music as well as electronic dance music and pop music, not always, but often it will start off very simply and build.
Right, so that you can actually keep creating new impulses and stuff.
Right, so you might start with just a drum beat, like, what's that? Da, 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 da.
Oh,
I forget what it's called.
Now I'm embarrassed because I don't remember what it's called.
I forget what it's called. Anyway, but like lots of music will start off with one instrument, perhaps, maybe a drum or a simple melody, and then it will layer it on and on. And it does it like every 16 beats or something like that. It's very, very mechanical in a lot of electronic dance music. Well, you start out with just like and just as you're like, all right, that's grooving, but you don't want to listen to just for 10 minutes. But you might listen to a 10-minute track that is constantly adding things. So just 16 beats seems to be the time when your mind is like, okay, I get it, and your mind starts looking for something else to pay attention to.
Right.
And that's add something new. Okay. It'll add a bass line. It'll add something else, right? And stories do this, right? Like you start off, a lot of stories start off with somebody in a normal situation, and then something goes wrong, and then they try to overcome that, and you feel relief, but then something else goes wrong, and nobody watches 2-hour movies about somebody having a pleasant dinner.
Oh yeah, that would get really boring.
So you have to have like novelty, and so that appears all over the place too.
Well, like, also, like, okay, well, we talked about novelty, but we also talked about patterns. So the point is that you're making is that patterns aren't the right way of doing something, or the patterns aren't really helpful?
No, you have to have patterns.
You have to have patterns.
It's a balance. Here's a good example. If you put like a TV on, like an old TV on channel fuzz, like just no station, right? And it's just white noise and white, like static.
Mm-hmm.
As far as novelty goes and incongruity goes, that is very high density information. Like every millisecond, you're getting a brand new image that has never existed and never will exist in the universe again. But how interesting is it to look at?
Not very interesting.
Nobody wants to watch static. Okay, so even though there's less information in a picture of a photograph of a sunset, like there's like if you were to compress it in a JPEG, it would be a smaller file.
Mm-hmm.
It's more meaningful because you notice the patterns in them, and those patterns are interesting to you, right? So and I think that like sometimes people feel this depending on how much energy they have. Like I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll be like in the mood for a movie that's really like challenging and meaty, right? Like I'll be like, I want to watch David Lynch tonight. Like I want a real like something that I'm gonna be baffled by and fascinated by, and sometimes I just want to watch Caddyshack, like where you get it, you might have seen it even before. So I think that people have different desires but you have to have patterns, because if you don't notice any patterns, you get very, very quickly get bored. And if there are too many patterns, you get bored. Just like constant beat or looking at a painting that's just white paint.
Mm-hmm.
Like conceptually, it might be interesting for a couple seconds, but you're not going to study it and stare at it there's nothing new to discover about it.
Right.
So, it's something interesting. There was a show a while back called The X-Files.
Yeah.
And it was a show that, well, I guess the contemporary is Lost, which I didn't actually watch, so I'm going to talk about The X-Files, but I think they had a similar thing. But The X-Files had lots of mysteries in it that were totally baffling. Like there was this black goo, and there were these aliens, and there was this secret sinister organization, and bees, and I could not stop watching the show. And then the X-Files movie came out, and I watched the movie, and it was so satisfying because they wrapped up all the mysteries. Like, they explained how all of them work together. And it was I got a lot of pleasure out of that. But I'll tell you what, I never watched The X-Files again.
Because you got the pleasure already?
Because I figured it all out, and my mind could let it go.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I got it. That's why, like, leaving a chapter on a cliffhanger gets you reading more, because it leaves you with a hole in your mind that you need to fill because of your curiosity. And if it's completely a self-contained and everything's wrapped up at the end of a chapter, you might put the book down and just never feel the drive to pick it up again.
Right. Okay, well, like, why is it that... Sorry, go ahead.
That's why too much pattern can be boring.
Right, and well, why is it that psychologically that whenever, for example, you go for a cliffhanger, you want to keep going? Is it because you always want to have this sense of resolution inside of you?
Yeah, the incongruity, if it's done correctly, causes a drive for your thirst for knowledge. People are inherently curious. Yeah. Here's the thing. We want patterns, and we seek out opportunities to find them. And once we feel like we completely understand something, we don't want to attend to it any longer.
Because we already know it, right? Yeah.
Our minds are curious, and they're going to look for something else to chew on.
Okay. Well, it's kind of like the example of, this may be a bad example, maybe not, but like, for example, whenever you're hungry, you want to eat something that's calorie dense with fatty foods, and then once you have that, you kind of don't want to have anything else besides that. Is that a good example, maybe? I don't know. But anyway, no,
I'm trying to think. That's an interesting example because I feel like if you ate nothing but Cheetos all day, you'd get tired of them.
Right, yeah, that was my question.
But if you would switch to another calorie-dense food like ice cream, you'd probably be like, yum, give me another bowl.
But then once you finish ice cream, you would actually go to something else like brownies or something. It would just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, with food, there's interesting research about food because people, if you, let's just imagine your favorite restaurant. All the listeners, imagine your favorite restaurant. You probably have a dish you love there. Yes. That maybe you get a lot, okay? Now, if someone were to come up to you and say, hey, you just won a random prize, you can eat here 10 more times.
For free or whatever, yeah.
For free, but you have to decide what meals you're going to eat right now. You have to order right now. What most people do is they say, oh, well, I have my favorite dish, but I want a variety. I don't want to eat the same thing every time. So they'll get a variety. Here's the problem. That is a good strategy if you're eating there like every day or every other day. But if you're eating there once a month, you should pick
the same thing.
The same thing because you need time or variety, but not both. But people don't know. This is actually one of the ways that people screw themselves over with happiness. They don't really understand this. So what happens is they'll pick a variety, and then they'll go 1 month, and then 2 months later they'll come back, and they'll be like, oh, I really am craving that thing, but I guess I ordered some substandard thing.
Right. Okay. Well, it's like we want, because we're talking about incongruity and we're talking about patterns, do we want incongruity within the patterns?
Well, we want them both, right? So we want to keep learning we want to be able to keep learning about something. So if you talk to people really trained in art, like museum curators or something.
Okay.
When they describe a masterpiece, it's very interesting. One of the ways they describe it is that they call it bottomless. And what that means is that no matter how much you study it, and no matter how many things you think you've learned about it, there's always more to find.
Right.
So people talk about chess that way, in a way that they don't talk about Monopoly, right? So like chess is feels like a game of infinite depth. Like the longer you study it, the more you learn, and it would never end. It really feels that way, right?
Right.
And certain masterpiece paintings and even like symphonies or whatever feel bottomless, and it pays off the longer you study it, the more that you're going to get. And then there's some things that just feel like fluff, and you see it once, and you never feel a desire to return to it. So, the idea is that in a masterpiece, you keep finding patterns, which is required for you to keep your interest. Because if it's not paying off in terms of patterns, you're not getting your money's worth, so to speak, in opioids.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But if there's nothing if you don't feel that there is anything to discover, you also won't go back. So I'll give you an example from something I love. I love Star Wars. Love it. Love Star Wars. Love all the movies.
Nothing wrong with that.
And one of the things that's so great about it is that the world mostly makes sense. And what I mean by that is when Yoda vanishes when he dies, but Qui-Gon Jinn does not, I feel that it's worth asking why, and that maybe there's an answer we can figure out. I do not feel that with Harry Potter. Like when Harry Potter characters can't create money out of nothing, I think that just feels like a completely arbitrary rule that Rowling made up, and I don't feel the need to dig and try to find an answer because I don't think there is an answer. I think it's just a totally arbitrary, fanciful thing. That's Alice in Wonderland, another great example. Wizard of Oz. Those worlds are very random and very meaningless, and there's not a system that rewards further investigation into how the world works.
Right.
In the way that Star Wars is. So to me, the reason you get these incredibly long discussions about why things are happening in Star Wars is because people feel that it's sort of bottomless and there's more and more to learn because they feel that there's an underlying system that will make sense if you search for it. And that's part of the reason people got angry at Lost, because nothing was wrapped up. And then J.J. Abrams basically said, yeah, it's all just weird mystery and there is no solution to it. And that makes people angry because the show, I didn't watch it, but apparently the show like made people very curious to find the answer. And basically they were told, not only aren't we going to give you the answer, but there is no answer to find, so all of your curiosity is for naught.
Yeah, but my that's a really good point, by the way. But my question is that why is it that when you first watched Star Wars, you wanted to go back to it, but when you first watched Harry Potter and Alice in Wonderland, you never wanted to go back to it? Is it because that those two, to you, as far as perception, were fluff, and then Star Wars had the pattern that you were looking for?
So things like, I don't want to put down Harry Potter and the Wizard of Oz. I mean, like, I love Oz and stuff. They're good, but they're good for different reasons. Like, they have nice plots and good characters. Like, that stuff's all there, okay?
Yeah.
Just that the world that they've built is not as systematic as Star Wars. So part of the reason I'm a scientist is because the reason science is even possible is because the world behaves in predictable ways, and it's worth trying to figure it out. Like, we can find, the trains, we have trains that run and airplanes that fly because the world is a system, and we are just trying to crack its code.
Right.
Right? But when I look at The Wizard of Oz and I see that certain animals can talk and others can't, I have no confidence that there is any good, interesting reason for that that I could ever, or anybody could ever figure out. So I don't feel the need to rewatch the movies and reread the books over and over again looking for it. That's what I'm getting at.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But like, also I had one more question because I read maybe a couple parts of your book when you were talking about what makes us anxious, right? And so take for example that you're watching, I don't know, this might be a bad example. You're watching a horror movie. Why is it that when you're watching a horror movie, you want to keep watching it? Kind of like when you're watching Star Wars, you want to keep watching it. Why is it that when you watch a horror movie, you want to keep watching it? Even
so horror movies are a great puzzle for a lot of people because in many ways they're not pleasurable at all. Like, you're actually there to feel fear, which is an aversive stimulus and most people don't want. So it's a bit of like, people think it's a paradox. I think I understand why, so I'm going to give you my
Sure, I'll take it, yeah.
But basically, it all draws back to what I said about how most of your mind doesn't realize that what you're looking at isn't real, okay? And the fact is that threatening things feel important to watch. So when I lived in Atlanta, I did my graduate school in Atlanta, which is a big car town. And every morning on the radio, you could hear about car accidents causing a traffic jam, right?
Right.
Every single time, there might be a traffic jam on the northbound 85, but then there'd be a traffic jam on the southbound 85 because of all the rubberneckers. Mm-hmm. So everyone is like craning and slowing down to look at the accident. Why would they do something like that? Like, it's not pleasurable to see a broken car. It's not pleasurable to see a person bloody and skidded across the road.
Right, yeah.
But somehow we are drawn to pay attention, okay? And I think it's because we learn through observation. And part of our minds wants to figure out, like, who got hurt, what did they do wrong, that kind of thing. And so when we watch a movie like a zombie apocalypse movie, part of our mind thinks that what we're watching is real, and we need to know what's happening because they're very high stakes. People are dying, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think part of the evidence of that is that we dream about it. Well, so the first part of the evidence is that you can only somewhat ameliorate your emotions by telling yourself it's only a movie. Like, you can't completely shut down your emotions when you watch a movie. You can't just say, it's just, not only is it a movie and the actors aren't really getting hurt, that's one level, but like, that would be like a stage play. You're not even watching people. You're just looking at light on a screen.
Exactly, yeah.
You're looking at light on a screen, yet you're terrified, and you cannot shut that off. Just like you can't hear language in the language that you know and not hear words, you cannot shut off your emotions for that kind of thing. And then one of the best theories of dreams is that it's virtual practice. We dream about things that our mind feels is important to practice. And so we have this little story here. You watch a movie about a zombie apocalypse, and you might have a nightmare about zombies. Why? Because a lot of your brain is like, what am I going to do if there's a zombie apocalypse? I've seen it happen. We need to plan.
Right.
Let's run through some scenarios of how you would run away and hide and fight for your life. And you end up having these nightmares, but the whole thing feels important because we want to learn from observation. So I think, to me, the mystery of horror movies, fail videos, and rubbernecking in traffic, and a lot of news, frankly. Like, when you listen to the news, it's almost all negative. I think all that stems from a desire to learn about how things can go wrong in the world.
Right. It's funny, like, this is actually something, what you talked about, the news always showing negative things and, like, basically not any positive things. But now, because of the fact that they're showing so many negative things, especially my family and some families too, they're saying, like, oh, there's only bad in the world and all of that. Is it, in your opinion, as far as perception, do you think that, is it because you are being told something over and over again, so you start to believe it, or is it just that they've created this reality in your brain that the world is so bad?
Both. I mean, I'm very much against news. I think almost nobody should watch it or read it.
Okay.
And I could go on and on about why, but I'll just say something briefly. I'm reading Steven Pinker's new book about how the world's getting better. And in one chapter, he talks about how crime has gone down worldwide since we've been able to measure it.
Oh, wow.
But of course, it's not a completely smooth curve. Like, it goes up and down and up and down. Of course, right?
Yeah.
And they found out that the New York Times, which is not some crappy fly-by-night paper, the New York Times reported every time things got worse and never when they got better. So even though the world was getting better the entire time, because the readers only heard about when things got worse, they're left with an impression that crime is increasing. And the interesting thing is that crime has been decreasing for decades and decades now.
Right, yeah.
And people don't believe that it is. They think it's getting worse. And yeah, I partially blame the news media for that, but it's also but they're in competition for attention just like any other media. News Today has to compete with movies and YouTube and video games. Yeah. And basically, if you just give good news, you're not going to get the eyeballs, right? So, and we have this bias for negative stuff, so, people end up with very, very skewed views of how the world works.
Right, and it's also, I'm sure you agree, that, like, they use the negative things to get the attention, right? And the positive things are stuff that, like, we're all used to, and so that's why they use the negative things to actually create that platform of people to come back and be like, oh, why is it bad? What's going on? Oh my gosh, the world's so bad.
Yeah.
So, like,
I don't know if we're really used to it, but it's definitely, like, good things usually take longer too. So it's not sudden. Like, think about how much faster it is to destroy a building than to build one.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's a very apt metaphor for most of the world. Like, good things take a long time, and bad things can happen very suddenly. And so it feels very newsworthy to talk about how, 200 people died in a plane crash, and you'll never hear on the news, yep, 200 people died on cars today, just like yesterday, and just like the day before.
but that's so sad. But why is it that you talked about good things take a while to develop? Like, why is it that is? Like, I don't know what you mean by that.
What I mean is that, any effort to do something good in this world,
right,
just happens to take longer than destroying it.
Okay. Yeah.
So any idiot can destroy a sculpture, but not everybody can build a sculpture, and not everybody can build a good one. And even if you can build one, you can't do it as fast as you can destroy it, right?
Yeah.
So I've been writing my latest book on imagination for the last 4 years. How long would it take me to destroy that book?
Just like throw it in a fire.
I throw it in I don't even have it printed out. I don't have a single copy printed out. All I have to do is just make sure all the files go in the trash, and it'll be gone.
Wow,
and so, I don't know if there's any profound reason for it, but it's like the good stuff is a slow build, and it's hard to say, like, now's the time to report it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's actually, in my opinion, quite scary how the good, like, in a way, people don't care for the good as much as the bad because they want to feel like there's stuff going on, stuff to think about, stuff to worry about. And
well, they're worried about, it makes them worry about all the wrong things, but I mean, I'm learning from this book that even in spite of all that, the world's getting better in almost every way, so.
Right, yeah.
Even though people like have no idea what's happening in the world, it is getting better.
Right, and like last thing before we stop, we talk about so much about how we're like things are getting so much better, but we're focusing on the negative. How do you think that applies to actually being attracted to something? Like this whole conversation is about what attracts us, right? Attracts our attention. When we're attracted, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We have a negativity bias, and this has been found across a lot of studies.
Yes.
And the basic explanation for it is evolutionary, in that dangerous, negative things are often a more immediate threat, and so we have a bias to perceive negativity, remember it, report it, share it, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
yeah. A very simple example might be you're walking in the jungle and you see what looks like a tiger, but it's actually a fern. Okay?
Right.
Now, but it might have been a tiger. So, but what you never do is you see a tiger and think it's a fern.
That's true.
Or you never like see a person's body in the road and think, oh, I thought that was a pile of garbage. It's always like, oh, that pile of garbage looks like a human body. So we have these, and you can imagine that the people who just saw good everywhere weren't able to avoid the dangers of our ancestry. So we developed this bias to attend to negativity, and now it gets exploited in art, which is potentially harmless, but news, which is not.
Right. Huh. Okay. That's really interesting. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. I think that answered basically all the questions I had for today. Is there anywhere that you want me to, anything that you want me to put in the description below for the listeners, for like
sure,
your
just
book?
Put a link to my book and maybe my podcast.
Your podcast? What's the name of your podcast? I'll write that down.
Minding the Brain.
Minding the Brain. How many episodes you guys have out?
Right now it's 3.
3. Okay, and I heard that that's with the help of another prof as well?
Yes, a award-winning prof, Kim Hellemans, who's a neuroscientist. So the podcast is basically, she interviews me about stuff I know about, and I interview her about stuff she knows about, and we know different kinds of things, so it's makes for a good conversation.
Right. Oh, that's great. Maybe I'll email her and do a podcast with her too.
Oh, that'd be great. Please do.
All right, well, that was Dr. Jim Davies. I just wanted to thank him really deeply and sincerely for being here. A lot of people have been asking me to talk to him today, and it means a lot. And so everyone should go check out his book, Riveted, which was out in 2014. I know I'm going to order it literally right now. And so we talked about what attracts our attention and everything that goes with that, habits that create that, perception that causes that. So that's Nofal Jari, and this is Life with a Sixth Sense. Thank you all for being here. I'll talk to you soon.